Thank you all for joining us for today's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual and live events by visiting us at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Mona Awad in conversation with Iain Reid, talking about Mona's new novel, All's Well. Mona Awad is the author of a Bunny, named the best book of 2019 by Time, Vogue, and the New York Public Library. Is currently in development for film with New Regency Productions. Her first novel, 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize and winner of the Colorado Book Award. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Vogue, Time, McSweeney's, Plowshares, and elsewhere. Tonight, she'll be talking about All's Well, a novel about a theater professor who's convinced staging Shakespeare's most maligned play will remedy all that ails her, but at what cost? Miranda Fitch's life is a waking nightmare. The accident that ended her burgeoning acting career left her with excruciating chronic back pain, a failed marriage, and a deepening dependence on painkillers. And now she's on the verge of losing her job as a college theater director. Determined to put on Shakespeare's All's Well that Ends Well, the play that promised and cost her everything, she faces a mutinous cast hellbent on staging Macbeth instead. Seeing her chance at redemption slip through her fingers, she suddenly meets three strange benefactors who have an eerie knowledge of Miranda's past and a tantalizing promise for her future. All's Well reveals a woman at her breaking point and a formidable, piercingly funny indictment of our collective refusal to witness and believe female pain. Awad will be joined in conversation by Iain Reid, the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which has been translated into more than 20 languages and has been adapted to film by Oscar winner Charlie Kaufman. His second novel, Foe, is being adapted for film, starring Saoirse Ronan, with Reid co-writing the screenplay. His upcoming novel, We Spread, will be released on September 27th of this year. Today's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone else has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Lastly, please support the authors and Powell's by purchasing a copy of All's Well from us. A link to buy All's Well will be shared in the chat a couple of times during this event, along with links to Iain's books and Mona's other books as well. So, Mona and Iain, it is such a pleasure to have you with us today, and thanks for being here.
Hello.
Thank you.
It's really nice to be here, and we were chatting a little bit before going live, and just saying how it's a real pleasure and honor for me to get a chance to talk to Mona today, because I've been a big fan of her work for a while, and particularly All's Well is a book that I think is brilliant, and I've been telling lots of my friends and family about it now for a while. So congrats, first of all, congrats Mona on the paperback release. That's pretty significant.
Thank you so much.
And
yeah, I'm a fan of your work too. So
thank you.
Very exciting for me as well. Yeah.
And thank you to everybody who has logged in tonight. Obviously, we would be doing this, I think, in person. We would all be preferring to do that, but at the same time, we're accustomed to these types of events, and it still requires people to take the time to join us. That's why we do it. So thank you to everybody for taking the time to do that, and hopefully we will touch on some topics of interest. But I think before maybe we even get to our discussion and some of the questions that maybe I have for you, I was hoping maybe you might be able to do a little reading just to give a little context to the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Iain. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, Powell's, for hosting us. Iain and I are both huge fans of the bookstore, and as I said, I'm a huge fan of Iain's novels and can't recommend them enough. So, yeah, really excited to be talking with you today. So I'm just going to read a little bit of All's Well. I'll read from the second chapter, just this condensed version. So this is a scene where Miranda, this theater professor, is going to confront her already kind of mutinous students. And she has this one encounter with like kind of her nemesis student. So I'll just read that. When I get to the theater, they're already sitting on the stage as they were in my daymare, legs swinging over the edge, faces shining but unreadable. Mutinous? Maybe. Hard to tell. Still, they're here. They each appear to be holding a copy of All's Well, my director's cut. That's something. They haven't torched them in a communal burning yet. That's something too. Third rehearsal. They have already formed vague alliances in accordance with the social hierarchy and are sitting in their respective clumps, not smiling, not frowning, waiting, just staring with their young eyes that think they see. My leg stiffens. I smile. Hello all, I say. They murmur hello back. Their smallness, their radiant faces, their youth usually moves me a little. So adorable, really. Today, though, I only feel fear. They look at me now, waiting, I realize, for me to speak. Because there are things I say, apparently. Aren't there things I say that light them up, that sway them? I have forgotten these things that I say. Tonight, even more is required, I can tell. A stirring up of morale. They've read the play a few times now, the play I have chosen over the play they wanted, and there are hurt feelings. There is incomprehension. Miss Fitch, we don't understand why. Why are you making us do this play? I feel cold sweat down my back and my right leg seizes up even more. I become terribly aware of my limp, my hunched hobble. I lean against the table. I try to smile more warmly. I'm their friend, yes, remember? Now at last, Brianna raises her hand. Brianna of the burnished hair. Brianna of the B- mind, who yet believes Brianna deserves an A for breathing. Reading an essay of Brianna's will make you fear for the future of America, will make you hiss, what the fuck are you talking about, aloud at the bar where you have to go and get loaded on Pinot Grigio in order to grade Brianna's paper, so that the bartender will say to you, Miss, are you all right? He will even put his hand on your shoulder, he is that concerned. And you will say, I'm fine, I'm so sorry. And you will look into his face and his eyes will be so blue and kind. You will recall when such a face and torso stirred something deep inside you in a place where there are now only dead leaves skittering. You will look back at Brianna's paper. You will observe that she chose the Garamond font. You will proceed to write B- in the top left-hand corner, even though it is a C tops, but you will hesitate, your pen suspended over the page. You will mentally fast forward to the moment when you hand Brianna her essay back, branded with this B-. She will receive it and immediately look as though she has been stung by 1,000 wasps, and you will wish that she would have brought this to her performance of Juliet. You will watch her face redden, first with embarrassment, then with outrage, her chin tilt up, up, up in defiance. She will assume you have given her this grade because you are an idiot and or jealous of her beauty and youth. You are not the former, but you are most certainly the latter. So it is not without some fear, some guilt, that you will watch Brianna march toward your desk after class, watch her flip her shining hair around in an attempt to blind you as she complains, watch her eyes grow big and wet and desperate, watch her outrage bloom like an out-of-control flower. For this is not the way of the universe of Brianna, in which you are merely a cog in the great machinery of her ultimate success. The universe wishes for Brianna to succeed, to win. Hearing Brianna protest like this, knowing your own inner failings, you might bow down to her will. You might hand over the A, because you are so tired, because Brianna's voice hurts not only your hip and spinal cord, it also lights up your inner red webs, flashing more quickly under her gaze. You might spare yourself all of this and give her the damned A to start with. And Brianna won't even thank you for this. She'll just feel like you were an unfortunate spider creeping around her dollhouse, but you were kind enough to die on your own. After all, her parents are donors to the school's decrepit theater program. Hence the fact that Brianna is Helen this year. Hence the fact that Brianna was Juliet last year. Hence the fact that Brianna was Rosalind the year before. Hence the fact that you have heard the soliloquies of Shakespeare's most complex and formidable heroines die in her unworthy throat. And yet, she is also the reason you have a ghost of a program at all, and she knows this. I hate that I want Brianna to like me, even though I hate Brianna, and I hate that I hate Brianna, because what is Brianna's future going to be, really? A few years in the big city, pursuing her acting passion to no end, because there will be no mother or father to open the doors to those gilded places. She'll be forced at last to stare her own mediocrity in the face. She'll marry a stockbroker, start a vegan mommy blog, enlist her future spawn in ballet. Grow up, I tell myself. Be the adult, be the teacher. Lie to this long-haired child and tell her the reason we are doing this play is because it will stretch her and her fellow cast members to take on a play that is disturbing, but not in an obvious bloodbath orgy way, that is witchy without the cackling hags, that is funny sad rather than simply sad, that is dark light rather than just dark, just light, that is problematic, provocative, complex, and mysterious, a hidden mountain flower growing in the shade of Shakespeare's canon, that hasn't been put on by a million fucking schools already, and is timely too, socially relevant. Miranda, Brianna says. Brianna always calls me Miranda, never Miss Fitch, let alone Professor. She looks at me now, and I cower. Can you believe this? I brace myself for, couldn't we warm up first? She already begins to stretch her body in anticipation, stretches her arms high above her head. See how much my body needs and loves this. I have a vision of killing her. It's not the first time. We really need to get a move on today, I'm afraid, I tell her. I always forget their warm-ups. I can't help it. I hate the warm-ups, leading them through that. It pains me to watch them, how their movements are so easy, so quick, how their movements lubricate their already lubricated bones, make their faces grow flushed. Really, it's like watching them all fuck. But Brianna warming up is the worst. The sight of Brianna's lithe body moving beneath the stage lights actually hurts my eyes, causes them to water. It's like staring right at the sun. It's like willing yourself to go blind. I'll do a quick one for them, Miranda, Grace says quietly in my ear. I turn to her, standing beside me now. Fine, I say, fine. I dissolve into the dark wing. There, I watch their bodies bend and sway. I grab a bottle from my pocket and pop another pill. I don't even bother to check which bottle. I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you very much. That was great, and I think that particular section that you read, I'm glad you picked that particular section because I think it gives a glimpse at some of the humor in the book. And one of the things I really appreciate about the novel is that it touches on some pretty bleak stuff, some pretty heavy stuff. It touches on some genre elements, I think, and it also has this thread of humor running through it. And to me, it's a very hard thing to even attempt and do. So that little section right there, I think it encapsulates that nicely. Maybe to start, I would just ask you, Mona, to tell me a little bit about the kind of impetus to this story. Or I know usually with novels, sometimes it starts with a vision or a character or an idea. I would just be very interested to hear how the novel started for you.
Yeah, sure. So it kind of came from two places. One was I was struggling with chronic pain myself for a number of years and was kind of in this limbo where I was, seeing a lot of different doctors and physiatrists and physical therapists and wasn't really getting any better. And it was really affecting my mobility. It wasn't life-threatening in any way, but it was just kind of, narrowing my life, couldn't really drive, couldn't really stand, couldn't really sit. It was just, I couldn't really do any events during that time. So it was hard. And I was interested in kind of the world that I was being exposed to. It was a number of other people deal with chronic pain every single day, and so kind of seeing this environment, seeing these people around me and seeing some of the absurdities and the darkness. And, you know, that was definitely something that was like, oh, this is a world that I definitely want to explore in story form, and that I don't often see in fiction. So there was that end of it. And then also at the time I was a graduate student, and I took a Shakespeare class. And I think it was just my frame of mind around that time, but I'd always liked Shakespeare. I'd always been interested, but I really fell into the plays. It was like almost a world that I could completely lose myself in, because I was grappling with pain, I think. There's so much room. I think that's why there's so many adaptations of Shakespeare. There's just, the plays are so complex, but they're so open. There's so much room for anybody who's interested in creativity to kind of find stories in there that really speak to them. So I really got into All's Well That Ends Well, which is like one of his least popular plays, but I was so into it. And then, yeah, I think those two things kind of started coming together. I was always interested in writing a story about a director who had kind of like a irrational attachment to a play. And then here was my irrational attachment to All's Well. So I think the two things started to kind of come together in that way. Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to ask you a little bit more even about Shakespeare. I mean, was this course that you took, was that sort of the first time that you really got in depth into Shakespeare, or did you have a relationship before that, or was that when you really, as you said, kind of particularly with All's Well That Ends Well?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I was really into Shakespeare in high school. But then when I was an undergraduate and I was an English major, and in Canada, you take a pre-1660, you know, as an English major, and I decided to study medieval stuff, and I got really into that and kind of bypassed Shakespeare. And so it was really only years later that I started getting really excited about it. Actually, when I was a graduate student and I started taking these courses, first it was a Winter's Tale, and I got really into that play because it's very fairy tale, like really magical and strange, and then All's Well. And I think there was something just about Helen too. She's a very polarizing character, this main character of All's Well That Ends Well. A lot of people hate her, like, and I find that interesting.
Which also
why?
comes up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So she was great for that reason, because she's so polarizing. There's lots of room to play as a fiction writer.
Yeah, and you also said in the first question, you mentioned again about a theater director and kind of your interest, or your that you could see that as a potential character for your writing. And how did that come about? Do you have a relationship with the theater yourself, or how did you sort of see that happen?
Yeah, you know, I think it probably, again, it was probably coming from a couple of places. I always loved theater in high school, but then something kind of happened to me. I don't know. I got really shy about being on stage. I used to love it, and that's how I got into writing. Actually, was I would write skits. I loved that energy and dialogue.
Did you write them for yourself? Like, you perform them?
Yeah, sometimes I would, or I would write them for our drama club in high school. So I wrote skits for them, and that they developed into a play that they then performed. But I also performed in one. So I was really interested in it. Like, there was some kind of creative energy happening there in dialogue that got me really excited.
You didn't find yourself being nervous at that point? You were comfortable to go to?
No, I was nervous.
Oh, you were, okay.
I was,
but it was
I was really
nervous that you found compelling, or that you wanted to sort of chase. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I just thought, you know, yeah, you got to get over it. That's what I kept telling myself. Just get over it. You know, it's part of it, right? Being nervous. Yes. But it became too paralyzing, I think.
Oh, so it actually got worse as you went.
Yes. Yeah, and I got more interested in writing than I did in being on the stage performing.
Right.
So then I sort of moved away from that and really started writing stories, you know, and that's how I would kind of play out dialogue. But the director kind of came, I think, from some of my experience and some of my interest in the dynamics, especially as a student, because I was a student for a long time too.
Right.
Just those really interesting classroom dynamics between teachers and students, and how the power isn't always where you think it's going to be. You know, even though she is a theater director, supposedly in charge, you know, she has no power with these kids. Right?
Well, I think the power and the fear a little bit too. I mean, that,
yeah,
there is that, I think, in the novel as well. I'm interested to ask you a little bit about that relationship, the teacher-student relationship, but actually maybe I'll just ask you more generally about relationships, because that's something else that I find maybe the most interesting thing as a reader, to kind of come across fiction that is, you know, there can be various plot points, but if it's about relationships, I feel like that's the most interesting thing. And I think, you know, you might read a synopsis of your novel and it may not touch on that, but to me it's very much about relationships, and the student-teacher relationship, I think, is one of them, but also I would say friendships and how friendships can evolve. And so can you tell me a little bit just about relationships and how that is kind of for me anyway, and I'd be curious what you think, a big part of the book.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was really interested in that. I mean, I was really interested in how living with pain can kind of inform these dynamics, the intimacy that you can actually have with people, because, you know, when you're in pain, you're kind of in your own head, and it's really hard to be as present. And how can that not affect your relationships? And then also you're sharing your pain, and what are the ethics of sharing pain, you know? And how what does that do to relationships when we share pain, when we share maybe too much? How much is too much, you know? How much can a friendship hold? How much of your friend's pain can you hold without starting to create boundaries and creating distance that could be very hurtful, and stopping communicating, and all those things that, you know, all these little ways that I think we don't mean to hurt each other, but we do, right? So I was really interested in that, and I really was interested in exploring that with Miranda and Grace.
Even the moral responsibility, right? That
yeah,
falls into that category of friendships, and I think, and in this case, pain.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I would say that was probably kind of like because in the book there's kind of that takes a magic that becomes like a literal thing, right? But that was really the question that I was interested in, was just what happens, what are the ethics of transferring pain, sharing pain?
Well, because it's interesting that I feel like the relationship between Miranda and Grace changes, I think, in a way that seems to me almost counterintuitive, that as Miranda becomes better, or you know, it seems to be more regaining her previous form, and it has a negative impact on their friendship somehow. So that's, which I find pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. And you know, it's something I guess I kind of explored a little bit in 13 Ways. I was interested in going back to it. You know, when you undergo, I think, any kind of major change, you know, any change, I just think, it rattles the people around you, and it really shifts those dynamics. And let's say you change from being somebody who is, you know, really struggling in pain, you know, or you know, your body changes, and you feel better, but your friends are weirdly like not happy for you, because the dynamic has shifted. There's something in the dynamic that's shifted, and that it has to like kind of learn to adjust.
The relationship.
Yeah, it totally rocks the boat.
Even though it's rocked it in a positive direction, you know.
Yeah, it's still, I think it can be thorny, you know?
Yeah.
And Miranda's she's also, like, to be fair, you know, I think Grace finds her health a little bit insufferable. And there is something about, like, sometimes when people are down, we find them impossible, but sometimes when they're up, we find them impossible too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It can be too much.
So, yeah, exactly. So I was really interested in exploring that. Yeah.
And that, I mean, maybe in a way that's connected also to something that is a big part of a lot of Shakespeare's work, which is kind of the reversal of fortune, and how,
Yes.
you know, and someone being up. And I think in your novel, in Miranda's case, we get a sense of an earlier time when she was also up, when things were going
Right.
well, and she was acting, and she was, you know, she was married, and then of course when we are with her, she's very low, and it's very bleak, very bleak,
Yeah.
you know, at times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then she, of course, through when the novel takes this kind of surreal turn,
Hmm.
she's up again, and so there's this distinct reversal of fortune theme, I think. Um, can you tell me a little bit about that? Is that something that was in your mind, or that you find intriguing, or that you like, or was
Oh
consciously
yeah.
part of the building of the narrative?
Yeah. I mean, totally, totally, totally nailed it. I mean, that was the thing about this particular play, and Shakespeare in general, you know, loves that reversal of fortune. But yeah, that in the play, there's a king who is miraculously healed,
Yeah,
right? This aged king. And I was really interested in that. I was really interested in playing with that. And it gave me, when I was feeling so low, it gave me like that kind of hope, you know, that fairy tales give, because the play is kind of a fairy tale in a lot of ways. And I love fairy tales so much. And I think I love them because they do have that possibility of transformation. And they're also interested in that shadow side of transformation, the cost of transformation. So that is, I think, what excited me about the play, working with the play, is there's this transformation, but then there are definitely costs
yeah,
for Helen and for the king. And so exploring those in the novel was really fun. And I think that question about, you know, she wants desperately to be freed of her pain. But what will that cost her to be free of it? What will that turn her into? You know, how much of her humanity could she lose if she loses her pain? How much of our humanity is bound up in our ability to feel pain? And does feeling our own pain allow us to feel other people's, or is it a barrier? Does it not allow us to feel other people's pain because we're too wrapped up in our own? I actually don't know.
yeah.
But
That's, I mean,
I was interested. Yeah.
that, I mean, that, I think that's a really, you know, interesting part about pain. It's so personal, and yet there is this larger cultural perception of what it is,
Yeah.
which also then does change over the course of time too. It doesn't stay the same. um, it was just the idea of pain, and the, I guess, how the culture perceives pain, and particular kinds of pain. I mean, physical pain versus emotional or psychological pain, for men versus women. I mean, were you thinking about those things as well? You mentioned that you yourself had been, you know, suffering from chronic pain, so that it seems like that was something that was on your mind. Was that then something you wanted to
Yeah.
kind of work through or think about these questions by writing about it?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think definitely. I mean, it's a very lonely experience, I think, to feel pain, no matter what kind of pain it is, no matter what shape it takes. If it's emotional, it's mental, it's physical. I think it is very lonely, and it's lonely because it's so hard, I think, to give language to it, which is something I had a little bit of fun with in the book, where I kind of found dark humor as her trying to explain to her physical therapist her pain, you know. And then this guy asking her, like, you know, give me a number from 1 to 10, which all physical therapists do. I mean, a lot of medical, you know, professionals do. It's a way of kind of trying to gauge where you're at. But
But
you
it's
know, there's some
subjective. Like,
certain,
it's so
yes,
it's so there's so much of pain is, it's unprovable. It's not
yeah,
concrete or objective. So I think that's really interesting.
yeah, no, totally. So yeah, it's, you know, it's just that loneliness and that inability to communicate it, and then what that does to somebody. And of course, then that allows to that sort of lets it gives a little bit more license, I think, to what she does later. You know, in the book, that we sit with her in this pain, and we understand how lonely
Yeah,
she really is, and how lonely pain can make you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned, I was kind of curious when you mentioned just a couple minutes ago about that you like fairy tales, and that you, in a certain
Yeah.
way, you think of the book as a fairy tale. And I think, if I was reading the book for the first time right now as you're talking, and I was like, at the beginning of it, I would think, geez, doesn't seem overly fairy tale-ish to me. And there's a particular point in the book where it does, for me too, as the reader, I felt that it delves into that in a very appealing way, I think, that kind of crosses different genres. Again, like I was saying at the beginning with a certain kind of realism, humor, surrealism, and fairy tale, I think, as you said it, particularly when we meet these three men. So I would love to hear a little from you, a little bit both about your interest in fairy tales, trying to bring that into your own work, and also as like as a B part of that question, the idea of, and maybe you don't think about this, but the idea of mixing the sort of genre or tone of a story, which as a reader, I love when I read books like that, when it feels like you don't really know what to expect as you go. Usually if you read a book that's funny, it's funny all the way through, or a book that's unsettling, it's unsettling. But to read a book that is sort of funny and then gets very bleak and then becomes surreal, that's really appealing, I think, as a reader. So is it a fairy tale thing? And then do you think about kind of blending all that together?
The blending is, that's what's made me such a fan of your work, among other things. I love how you blend genres, and I'm really interested in that. But I'll talk about the fairy tales first. I've loved them ever since I was a kid. It's kind of my first real experience of story, and what really got me into storytelling, interested in it. And I think it really is particularly, and there's so many things about fairy tales that are wonderful. They're so weird, and they never explain. And magical things happen, violence happens. It's just
but
like it just happens.
Yeah,
you accept it. Yeah, it's kind of like a yes and form of storytelling, and I love that. And there's lightness and there's wish fulfillment, but there's also like real darkness that you move through, and I love that too. But the transformation, that's the thing about fairy tales that I think I love the most, is that possibility that they offer, that you can change form, that has always fascinated me. It's fascinated me from, I think, the very beginning of my creative life. And so I think, with Miranda, as with other characters I've worked with, I love that she undergoes this kind of strange magical change. It's kind of dark, but it's also light, like a little bit like a fairy tale, I hope. And that there is a shadow side to it
too, as we're reading it.
Yeah.
You kind of crave that you undergo that transformation, which is really
good. Yeah,
it's really interesting because obviously, sorry to cut you off, but it just as we're saying that, I was thinking, reading the sensation is that you're kind of like hopeful. Mine was hopeful of that, even despite the way she ends up using that transformation is maybe not what it would be, a little bit harder to justify potentially, but you're still kind of hoping for it. It's a really interesting sensation as a reader.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, I'm glad, because that's what I love about fairy tales, that they can kind of do that. And then the genre blending kind of, I've always been interested in it. Bunny is sort of a play with fairy tale and horror, and I think All's Well is a little bit too. But dealing with the two plays, because I knew that from the beginning. I knew that she wants to put on All's Well That Ends Well, right? She's all about this comedy, this weird like comedy, and the students want this tragedy. That's what they want, so she gets to put on All's Well, but she has to live Macbeth off stage. So I knew I was dealing with a tragedy and a comedy. And I gave myself some rules, on the stage is All's Well That Ends Well, but off stage in her everyday life, that's where Macbeth comes in. So that's where those three men come in, who are the witches. And
did you know that early when you started that distinction was going to be?
Yeah. Kind of use the stage a little bit as a dividing line, to help me. It just sort of, the theater just bleeds off the stage and into her own life very darkly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Something else I think that is has been maybe in your last two books is a not an analysis, but the idea of the world of academics, or it does seem like a sphere that interests you, that you write about very well, and with humor, and also in other ways. And I would like to know more about that. I would like to know more about why that interests you in the way it does, and why you choose to kind of write about it in that way.
Yeah. It's so funny. I mean, I think part of it is just having been like a student for a while, so I know that world pretty well.
Yeah.
And it's it's such a weird world. I mean, it has its own language. It's super insular. It's actually kind of very occult in a lot of ways. And you always feel like an outsider in it. You never feel like there's constant imposter syndrome. There's tons of tension. People never say what they mean, directly, right? There's so much like, there's definitely a lot of competition, of course. And so, yeah, I just think it's so interesting, it's interesting, and there's a lot of potential for drama. And then there are these generational conflicts, and then there are power dynamics that are there, between teachers and students. That I was really interested in that, especially having been a student for so long, and thinking, teachers, being, really like, I had a lot of respect and admiration for my teachers. But once I got on the other side of the desk, I just couldn't believe what a vulnerable place that is to be. I had no idea until I was behind the desk how scary that is to be a teacher, to stand up there and talk to students. It's actually it is really scary. So I was interested in that. Like, you look like you're an authority figure, maybe. You look like you know things, maybe, but it doesn't feel that way when you're up there.
And they make it as hard on you sometimes as possible too, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's of course, it can be super scary to be up there. So I was, I used all of that, what I had observed and some of my own, like, experiences just in my emotional, reality, like of being a teacher, especially in the early days, and just kind of blew that up. It was really fun. And I think it's there's a lot of conflict and drama in that. And this was a book about theater, so it was especially fun because of that.
Yeah. How about like a question about craft, if you don't mind my asking, because that's something that people tend to be interested in. And I'm wondering about something as sort of basic as, when you set out to write All's Well, did you have an extensive planning stage where you wrote outlines, or did you kind of approach it from the other way, where you, like you were talking about at the beginning, where you had the two pieces that you brought together, and then you just started writing and kind of tried to find the story through writing? Which way kind of, or was it a mix of both?
Yeah, it's so weird. I don't know what your process is like. I'd be very curious to hear. But with Bunny, I was kind of going from moment to moment a little bit. I knew some things far in advance, which was good. And I had the academic year also, which was good.
Yes.
And for All's Well, I knew I was dealing with 2 Shakespeare plays, so that intimidated me like a lot. And so I think for that one, because of that, because I knew I was trying to balance the tragic narrative and the comic narrative, I did sit down and do some planning, which I hadn't really done before in that way, but it was really helpful for this book. Well, I think I would have gotten lost.
I mean, that's just impressive that you can veer from your typical approach. I would find that, I would find that part of it quite taxing, I think, but also fun. And I think you're right in that this particular project warranted that. It made it so you were able to delve into it in the way you did by having a little bit of planning beforehand.
Yeah, and just a little, right? Because you want to be able to make discoveries in scene, but just knowing kind of like, okay, you're gonna, there's gonna be this scene and then this scene, and just like a couple of lines about that scene, just so I knew where I was going. I found that helpful. I didn't do it like from beginning to end, but I think I definitely had like the first third, I had kind of an idea of where I was going. And it was super helpful for this project, because, the 2 plays that was really intimidating. Shakespeare's intimidating, period, but at least for me,
to bring them together. I think, that's the other part of it. It's not just sort of getting trying to get most of one on a piece, but like actually really blending the two in sort of a seamless way would be, intimidating, I think, as you say it.
Yeah. Do you go moment to moment, or how do you
Yeah,
how
no,
do you kind of
I
approach?
do. Yeah, no, and I don't vouch for it necessarily. Like I wouldn't tell people to do it that way. But I would have a hard time, I think, trying to outline something, or I think for me that by writing it is how I start to know what it is. And I'll start with maybe a question or an image of something or a character that interests me and that sort of grabs my attention, and then I see if there's anything there by writing. I don't usually want to know so much about anything, and then sometimes what happens is you're right for a while and you realize there really isn't anything of interest, or there really isn't anything of substance there, or if it's a question, like, you kind of get to the answer pretty quickly and then it's not interesting anymore. But it's not efficient, I think. But for me, it does seem more fun, and it seems more surprising, and I would have a hard time, and that's why I was impressed that you're able to kind of transition from project to project, because that part of that stage of it, I think, is so important. The early part of writing something, it's for me the most difficult stage, when there's like, you don't have anything yet, and to kind of keep at it when there isn't anything to keep at other than your like projection of what maybe it could be, is difficult. And I think to be doing that in a new way would be really challenging.
Yeah, it's super hard. And I think the thing that anchors it, and I don't know if this is something for you too, it is very challenging, especially too when you are interested in the surreal and you know that you might be going in that direction. You might be playing with the borders of reality a little bit. But the voice, for me, I feel like if I get the voice, if I have like a solid sense of the voice, that helps a lot to kind of carry me through.
What about because you mentioned it briefly before, but dialogue. I'd like to ask you about that, because I think you write really good dialogue, funny, but also it's the kind of dialogue that rings true as you're reading it. You're not aware. Sometimes you're reading a book and you become very aware of reading it through the dialogue, and that's off-putting. And it's nice to be kind of swept up and lost, and then when you get to the end of the section, or you sort of, and you can kind of reflect on it. So do you enjoy, it seems to me as someone reading it that you enjoy writing dialogue, that you kind of relish that opportunity, that you take a lot of time with it. Is that right? Or does it seem to just flow out of you?
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. I guess it's just because that's how I learn about my characters, and I love like tensions between people that are revealed, like in their speech, like the subtext. I love subtext, and I love, I don't know, I love that so much, especially if there's like some kind of hidden conflict, which there always is, right? So I love playing with that in speech. Like, how much is this person going to reveal, in what they say, and how much they're going to conceal, and how much are their words going to reveal them, I love playing with that, and I can do that for hours and hours and hours. I think it's something that kind of actually, when I'm stuck, if anybody out there is a writer, this kind of helps me sometimes. I'll put two characters in dialogue, and it might help me like learn a bit more about them, and maybe give me a sense of the tension between them. I might discover what it is, and then that will help me with the scene, like build the scene out from the dialogue. Actually, I do that sometimes.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. That is, for me, interesting, but also I'm sure others listening, that can be very helpful to hear. I think we should maybe look at the questions a little bit here, just to try and include some of the audience members. So just in case I make some kind of error, but I think I should be able to. I'm not kind of doing this in any way other than I'm going to just kind of go through it. So the first question is, and this sometimes can be hard to answer off the cuff, so if nothing comes to you, that's fine. But the first one I see here is, who are your literary inspirations? So are there any? I mean, obviously Shakespeare is a pretty clear one, but any others that maybe for this particular project or for just for you in general, you know, and because that, I think some people are interested in that too.
Yeah. Okay. For this particular project, I mean, she's always an influence, I think, but I love Jean Rhys. She's a modern writer, early 20th century. She's best known for Wide Sargasso Sea, which is, I love that novel, but my favorites are more kind of like After Leaving Mr. Mackenzie and Good Morning Midnight. I just love novels where she's kind of just brooding in bars and like just being really, really like she's disclosing a lot and she's really vulnerable and just telling, it feels like she's being so intimate with the reader. And I love voices like that.
Yeah.
And so that kind of voice that feels like it's telling me kind of like really intimate stuff.
Yeah.
It's my favorite kind of voice. So her for sure.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The next question here, and this is actually something I was going to maybe touch on myself. So question is, I read that Mona curated playlists while writing Bunny and 13 Ways. Are there any songs that were associated with the writing of All's Well?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So weird. I was listening to the playlist before before our event. So Stardust, Nat King Cole's Stardust. It's definitely a favorite. I always picture the bar where she goes to, kind of get loaded and she meets the three men. And that bar sort of becomes like a weird, surreal theater space. It's like kind of a little demonic. Definitely that Stardust was, I always hear Stardust when I think of that bar. And then also Judy Garland, Zing Went the Strings of My Heart and Get Happy, even though those are happy songs, but there's like, to me, there's just, all I hear are the weird shadows in them. And so, yeah, and also just like, Judy Garland was somebody who suffered a lot and had to perform in spite of that. And so that really felt kindred to Miranda. So Judy Garland's voice and her dark joy, and her performance for sure. And then a weird one was a Led Zeppelin song, which sounds so strange. The Battle of Evermore.
Wow.
And I listened to that constantly when I was working on the final sequence of All's Well, which is really intense. But there's just something about it.
Together now, so.
Definitely that song. I love that song. That song is like a labyrinth, and I just felt like it was like an oral labyrinth that I could walk through while I was trying to figure out the end.
Well, that's great. Okay, here's a sort of general one. How was the process of writing this book different than Bunny and 13 Ways?
Yeah, it's interesting. 13 Ways was hard. Like, it was my first book, and it took me a number of years to write, and it felt like it cost me a lot. Not that I didn't have moments of joy and stuff like that, but it was a hard book to write. And I think, just it being the first one made it especially hard, but the content of 13 Ways, the subject matter, also made it hard. Bunny was different. Bunny was kind of like just joy. It felt crazy and I was a little scared because I was delving into new territory. For me, that was my first kind of delving into the surreal, because 13 Ways is pretty realist. Mm-hmm. So that felt a little bit scary, but it was really just fun, and fast compared to 13 Ways. All's Well was kind of a weird mixture of both. So it had the surreal kind of departures, which I really enjoy. I love the fantastic so much. I think it reveals our emotional reality sometimes more profoundly than just straight realism can. But it also has, kind of 13 Ways stuff too, like really barbed realist dialogue between people, there's so much stuff that's unspoken. So it was a little bit of both, I think. All's Well. There was joy, but then there was also stuff that felt hard,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Here's one that I also agree with. So 13 Ways and All's Well are also extremely cinematic and engrossing.
Thank you.
Does film inspire your work? And do you picture your films visually? I think is meant your books visually when you write them.
Yeah, I really, really do. And I think some of it has to do with just my early interest in theater, but I've always taken inspiration from films, you know, and from different kinds. Like obviously love Lynch, and I love Hitchcock, and Lynch, especially in the handling of the surreal. But I also really love Mike Leigh, who is a really like kitchen sink realist. And I love that kind of organic, those dialogues that he can get between people. So, you know, both of those styles of cinema really did inspire me. Mike Leigh, definitely 13 Ways, and then All's Well, probably more Lynch for sure.
And do you find that as you're working on something, you will actively seek out either books and or films that feel relevant? Because again, some people almost avoid. I tend to like to do that because it makes you want to like up your game, or like
Yeah.
and it feels exciting in a way what's possible, you know.
Oh
So
yeah.
you find that you will like kind of gravitate towards those things when you're working on something?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I watched, and this isn't Lynch, but I think I watched Slings and Arrows like so many times while I was working on. I'm such a huge fan. I love that show. And yeah, I did watch you know, Judy Garland, like her old performances on YouTube. Whatever I could find, I would watch.
Right.
I was really inspired by her. So yeah, it definitely feeds me. And the plays, I mean, I was reading the 2 plays constantly. You know, I listened to Macbeth and I read All's Well, and I always had the plays in my ear, so I could draw from the rhythms and the, you know, the language.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. How do you think the element of, quote, unreliable narration enhances the themes in the novel?
You know, it's fun. You know, unreliable narration is basically the portal to the surreal, right? Because everybody's version of reality is a little bit different, or our experience of reality is kind of unique. And so that's the way to kind of get there. That's the way to get to the edge of reality, is just be deeply inside the consciousness of someone and commit fully to their impression of what's happening. And then you can go there. You can go to that edge of reality so fast. And so yeah, that was basically my portal, was her unreliability. But having some foils, like Grace, is really important, you know? Somebody like Grace who can see from the outside and report something else, that's important for the reader, I think, to give them an anchor. So it's always good to kind of have this, like, I love that for this book, that was really pleasurable, was to have Miranda sort of be, you know, in her own experience, but then have these people who are contradicting a little bit, like what she's reporting.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from the audience is, I loved the ending for All's Well. Did you always know the story would end the way it did, or did the ending shift into what it became as you were writing the story? Yeah,
I'm so curious what happens for you, Iain, too, because your endings are fantastic. I tend to see the final image of the book.
And it's an image for you.
Yeah, it's just an image. I don't know how I'm getting there. I have no idea, and I'm not committed to it.
You'll see it early.
Yeah, I do. I see it early, but I'm not committed to it. I see it, and I may get there, I may not, and I don't know how. But that did happen for Bunny, and that did happen for All's Well. Is that I kind of saw, fundamentally, I saw the final moment.
Without the kind of infrastructure in place to necessarily get there.
Yep. Yeah. And no commitment to, like, I must get there. But I did keep it, I did hold it as like important, like, you know.
It's almost, it gives you almost a beacon to be, or like the lighthouse on the shore in the turbulent seas as you're trying to find your way. It's like, that's where I'm going, that in that direction.
Yes. Exactly.
That's interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't usually have that lighthouse, and I kind of sometimes wish I did, because it I don't necessarily know where it's going or what's going to happen, and that can lead to I think we're realizing if through multiple answers that I don't write in an efficient way, because it also can lead you down ways, and then how that doesn't quite work. And I seem to write too much, and then I have to sometimes backtrack or delete stuff, but then for sure when the ending comes into view, it. And maybe the best part of writing a book is that moment, when it sort of solidifies, and that image becomes hardened, and you think, okay, this is now what I have, and it's taken all this time to get there, but it sort of there's a very real satisfaction to that, I think.
Oh yeah, no, definitely, and it works out. I mean, your process works, right? So you gotta,
I don't know, but
do what works.
Okay, last question, because we're running out of time, but this will probably be quick anyway. But an audience member would like to know: can you tell us anything about your next project?
Yes, it is called Rouge, and it is about a woman who gets sucked into a very sinister beauty cult. And there are definitely elements of fairy tale and definitely elements of horror.
Oh wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, that definitely
it's fun.
We will all put that on our to be read list. But don't forget to think about picking up All Is Well, the book that we are here to celebrate. It's released in paperback, and it's definitely a book to celebrate and a book to read, and pass along to friends. Get a copy for your friends. It will generate discussion, and so I hope everybody who's been joining us today thinks about getting a copy. And thank you all for your questions, for your interest in Mona's book, and thank you to Powell's for arranging this. It's I've really enjoyed the chance to be here and to talk to Mona. So thank you all for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iain, and thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mona, so much for reading for us and sharing with you and sharing this amazing book with us today. So so definitely, all you out there, go check this out. I put a link in there to purchase this and to check out the stuff on there. So definitely check that. Check out Iain's books as well. Here's one of
definitely.
And the 27th, or We Spread, it'll be out there. So definitely, I'm looking forward to checking that out too. So, once again, thank you both, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Let's check out. We look forward to seeing you at another event. So anyway, have a good night, both of you. See you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Iain. Bye.
Thanks, Mona.